The topic of my presentation is developing oral language skills of children with different abilities through dialogic reading. With the passage of the No Child Left Behind Act of 2001 and the reauthorization of the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act in 2004, special educators are facing growing demands to develop children's language and literacy skills through evidence-based practices. It is a well-known fact that literacy begins in infancy. Therefore, it is of utmost importance that, with young children at risk for future literacy due to poverty, developmental delays, and/or disabilities, intervention starts as soon as possible. Dialogic reading is a promising research-based strategy that connects literacy development and language. It primarily focuses on developing children's expressive language skills. It helps children avoid both later reading failure and poor behavior. According to Morgan and Meyer, low oral vocabulary skills make it more difficult for children to use pragmatic language, thereby leading to more acting out or withdrawal behavior. Frequent reading storybooks improves a child's oral vocabulary skills, leads to vocabulary growth, and in turn later success in reading and in other academic areas. Children at the preschool age cannot read, and they need to hear the story before they can say anything about it. While reading the picture book, the adult has a conversation, a dialogue with a child. In the context of reading the storybook, the adult models oral language and encourages the children to express their thoughts in words. Dialogic reading can be used with children who are typically developing, as well as reading delayed and/or language delayed. It is effective with children ages 2 to 6 years old in a variety of settings. Dialogic reading is an interactive picture book reading technique developed in the late 1980s by Whitehurst and colleagues. Grover Whitehurst was one of the first researchers to apply sociocultural theory to shared reading. In 1988, he conducted an experiment on traditional storybook reading versus dialogic reading. Results showed that children in the dialogic group scored significantly higher on tests of expressive language when compared to students in the traditional storybook reading group. In 1994, he expanded his studies on dialogic reading to include child care teachers and children from low-income families. The results showed that dialogic reading can benefit low-income families and that the reading episodes can take place in settings other than the home. In the first video that we are going to watch, Dr. Grover Whitehurst discusses dialogic reading used with preschool-age children.
Around 24 months of age, around 2 years of age, would be a perfect time to introduce dialogic reading. This is an opportunity for a parent and child to sit together with a book, for the parent to initially read the book to the child, but in repeated readings of the book, place more and more emphasis on the child telling about the pictures in the book. A parent might ask a child to tell me what's going on this page, or tell me what this is, or what do you think will happen next, and other simple questions that can prompt the child to start telling the story himself or herself. These sorts of interaction techniques around books and in conversations in general can encourage children to develop a more extensive vocabulary, and that then can lead into more advanced interaction techniques, more advanced language interactions as children arrive at the pre-K period.
The purpose of dialogic reading is to get children talking as much as possible. This is what Dr. Christopher Lonergan says about research conducted on dialogic reading and some advantages of using dialogic reading strategies with young children.
What we know from the research is that when children are exposed to shared reading using dialogic reading, that they really do acquire greater levels of development in their vocabulary and other aspects of language. So not only is it designed to produce language, but there's a number of research studies that actually demonstrate that children who are exposed to shared reading with dialogic reading gain more vocabulary skills and other language skills than children who don't get exposed to dialogic reading. And the interesting thing there is that most of the studies had the children who didn't get dialogic reading is they got as much shared reading as the children who got dialogic reading. So it wasn't a difference in being exposed to storybooks, it was a difference in how they were exposed to storybooks. The idea is that there are different purposes for books. So understanding that doing dialogic reading doesn't mean that you're not going to do have times where you just actually read a book with children. You might even read a book just where you're the one who's reading and children are listening, during small group time, or during large group time, or during circle time. But dialogic reading is a special time. It's a special time to help children learn vocabulary, learn other language skills. Of course, dialogic reading is supposed to be fun. It's supposed to be fun for the children. It's supposed to be fun for the teacher. So turn taking and using different books. Using them differently, sometimes using them for whole group, sometimes for dialogic reading, sometimes that you just read. Seeing that process is okay, right? Dialogic reading is flexible enough that it shouldn't be seen as something other than fun, a fun way to use books and have conversation.
In the studies conducted by Mall and colleagues, there was found evidence that dialogic reading with older children does not have as great an impact as dialogic reading with younger age groups. This can be explained by the fact that older children, for example, kindergarten age, prefer hearing the story without interruptions, because they have sufficient linguistic skills and knowledge to sustain interest in the story without an adult focusing their attention by asking questions and providing explanations. They depend less on adults because they are more inclined to initiate dialogue. They will find interruptions for explanations annoying and interfering. More advanced skills should be practiced with older children by asking specific types of questions, evaluating and expanding on their responses. Now I would like to compare typical shared reading and dialogic reading. In shared reading, the teacher reads the text to the entire class, while in dialogic reading, the teacher works with small groups of children and facilitates their language through a series of prompts. In typical shared reading, the teacher occasionally points out pictured vocabulary, while in dialogic reading, the process focuses primarily on the book's illustrations. In typical shared reading, students take the more passive role of listening, while in dialogic reading, students are active participants. Through direct questions and feedback, the child is encouraged to expand on the answers instead of just giving simple yes/no questions. As for the home setting and traditional storybook reading, parents generally read the entire story with some parent-child interaction involving labeling or describing items, and little emphasis is generally put on sound and letter relationships. For example, a parent points out to an illustration and asks the child what it shows. In dialogic reading, parental feedback involves expanding, modeling, correcting, and praising what the child says. Dialogic reading is an active method. The child is highly engaged in the storytelling, and it is key to the child's interests, curiosity, and motivation to explore and experiment with a variety of literacy materials. Its biggest advantage is that it allows the child to take the lead, and the role of the adult is following the child's lead. Dialogic reading is more effective, as it has been already said, in improving expressive language skills. Callaghan and Medowing believe that dialogic reading provides a good opportunity to communicate the grammatical and syntactical structure of oral language to young children. A book itself provides a good model of the syntactical structure of the language. When listening to a book, children encounter a more complex syntactic structure that they do not use in everyday oral language. When reading a book, teachers give feedback and elicit correct syntax from children's open dialogue about the book. One of the key principles of dialogic reading is progressive change. The idea of progressive change is based on Vygotsky's zone of proximal development. It implies that the adult provides support activities that are just slightly more difficult than what the child can accomplish alone. A parent, for example, can facilitate progressive change by asking the child what he can do with an object after he has named it. In dialogic reading, the book is shared with the children a minimum of 3 times and often as many as 6 times. First, the teacher gives a preview of the book and 10 to 20 illustrations. Then, the teacher highlights spring concepts such as the author, illustrator, cover, title, etc. The teacher reads the book out loud, occasionally asking a question. Whitehurst and others believe the results would be more effective if the children's parents read the week's book repeatedly at home. If necessary, the parents could be trained in dialogic reading techniques.